Hey everyone, welcome back to The Dang Good Show. This is episode 36, and it's the second part in our three-part series, Navigating the Unknown, Intuition, Resistance, and Growth. I'm so glad you're here with me today, and I think this topic is going to hit home for a lot of us. Now, you might be wondering why I chose these topics for the series. Well, with fall and winter settling in, the days are getting darker, the sun isn't out as long, and for many of us, that can mean feeling more reflective or even facing things we tend to push aside during the brighter months. It's a perfect time to talk about leaning into the unknown, especially when it comes to listening to our intuition, facing resistance, and using both to foster growth. Today, we're focusing on resistance. We're diving into why we naturally push back against things that feel uncomfortable or challenging. I'm sure we've all had those moments, those decisions or opportunities we avoided because they just felt too daunting. But what if the very things we resist the most are the ones that hold the biggest potential for growth? So let's get into it. In this episode, we'll be exploring why we resist change and how, by embracing what we avoid, we can unlock some of the most profound growth in our lives. All right, so let's start by understanding what resistance actually is and why it's such a common response. Resistance, in simple terms, is our natural instincts to avoid anything that feels uncertain, challenging, or uncomfortable. And it's almost like an internal brake system that kicks in when we sense we're heading toward something unfamiliar. This instinct to resist actually comes from a really old part of our brain. Our ancestors relied on resistance to keep them safe from dangerous situations. The brain is wired to prioritize safety and comfort, so anything that feels like it might disrupt that balance can trigger resistance. Today, of course, we're not facing life or death situations daily, but that ancient wiring is still there. And instead of using it to protect ourselves from wild animals, it's now reacting to things like big changes, new jobs, or even new relationships. We're afraid of failing, afraid of not being good enough, or simply afraid of the unknown. But here's the twist. Growth rarely happens in our comfort zones. If you want to grow, to learn, and to evolve, it usually means stepping into something a little uncomfortable. And that's where resistance comes in. It's almost like a signal that you're on the edge of something important. Now, I want to get a little personal here. Let me take you back to my early 20s, a time when I was just stepping into adulthood. I'll be honest, I thought I had it all figured out. I had that typical youthful confidence where you believe you know what's best and don't need advice. I resisted anything that didn't align with my version of the right path. Looking back, I see how much my resistance held me back in some areas. I was scared to try new things or even listen to new perspectives because I thought I already had all the answers. And you know what? I ended up making a lot of mistakes because of that. I had to learn things the hard way through trial and error, often because I resisted accepting guidance or embracing change. Then, before my first solo trip to Seoul, South Korea, I came across The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. It's funny how a single book can shift your mindset, isn't it? That book opened my eyes to the power of acceptance. I started to see that a lot of my resistance came from fear of things going wrong, fear of being responsible for every outcome. And if I'm honest, fear of losing control. If I'm being real open, I'll tell you that I struggled with depression throughout my 20s. I was constantly stressed, always trying to control every little detail, always assuming that if something went wrong, it was somehow my fault. But reading that book made me realize that resisting life only made things harder. So fast forward to that solo trip to Seoul, South Korea. I had every reason to be scared. This was my first trip overseas, and I planned to stay for 4 months. On top of that, I felt like everyone was telling me not to go. Family members who usually didn't reach out suddenly called me up, practically ordering me to stay home. But there was something in me, a gut feeling, telling me that this experience would be worth it. I took that flight, and honestly, it was terrifying. I landed in a completely new city where I didn't speak the language fluently, had no family nearby, and barely knew anyone. I remember getting lost constantly those first few days, and at first I'd feel this surge of panic, thinking, what am I doing here? But then, almost as a way of coping, I started approaching each moment with curiosity. Instead of freaking out, I'd ask myself, where is this going to take me? And surprisingly, that shift in mindset made all the difference. I'd stumble upon amazing places I've never have discovered otherwise. Hidden alleyways filled with art, quiet temples with centuries of history, little food stalls that serve the best street food I've ever tasted. In those moments, I learned something powerful. Resistance isn't a barrier. It's an invitation. It's an invitation to be curious, to explore, and to discover. By embracing the discomfort of being in a foreign place, I found a new sense of freedom. I became more attuned to my surroundings, learned to navigate the city on my own, and felt a sense of accomplishment that changed my entire perspective. So, how do we actually embrace resistance in our everyday lives? Let me share a few strategies that have helped me and I think could help you too. Number 1, shift your perspective on resistance. Think of resistance as a signal that you're on the verge of something important. Instead of seeing it as a wall, see it as a doorway that could lead to new growth. Every time you feel the resistance, ask yourself, what could I gain by exploring this? This helps frame resistance as an opportunity rather than an obstacle. Number 2, ask, what's the worst that could happen? Often, the fear behind resistance is rooted in the worst case scenario. But when you break it down, you'll usually find that the worst case isn't as scary as you thought. By confronting this fear, you're taking away some of its power. You're telling yourself, even if the worst happens, I can handle it. Number 3, make curiosity a habit. One of the best ways to get comfortable with resistance is to build a habit of curiosity. Try to make small, uncomfortable choices every day, like talking to a new person or exploring a new part of your city. When you're curious, you're less focused on outcomes and more focused on the experience. This approach makes it easier to face resistance without feeling overwhelmed. Number 4, do your research. Knowledge can be a powerful tool in overcoming resistance. When you're faced with a decision that feels intimidating, gather as much information as you can. Before I went to Seoul, I did tons of research on the city, the culture, and even took Korean classes to help me feel more prepared. Knowing more about what you're facing makes it easier to stand your ground and trust your choice. It's not just about preparation. It's about building confidence in your ability to handle what comes next. Number 5, anchor yourself in the present moment. When we resist, it's often because we're worrying about the future or clinging to the past. By focusing on the present, you're less likely to let those worries take over. Meditation, deep breathing, or simply grounding yourself can make it easier to embrace the moment without resistance. Another lesson I've learned from embracing resistance is the importance of recognizing patterns in my life. Think about it. How many times have you gone along with something even though it didn't feel right, only to regret it later? For me, this was a big issue when I was younger. I used to say yes to things out of obligation or because I wanted to keep up with what others were doing. I'd go to every social event, take on every project, and basically burn myself out because I resisted saying no. But over time, I started to see a pattern. I realized that when I ignored my gut feelings and did things out of obligation, I usually ended up feeling drained and ultimately regretted it. This pattern helped me understand that resistance can sometimes be a signpost, showing me what I don't want and guiding me towards what I do. Enjoying what you're hearing? Fantastic! To make sure you're always in the loop with the latest episode, just hit that subscribe button. Your support makes all the difference. And hey, this podcast thrives because of awesome listeners like you. So a big shout out for that. And of course, I'm on Instagram. Find and follow me at Christine_Dang. Lastly, looking for more information on what we discussed today? Just cruise on over to thedangoodshow.com, click on the episode you're curious about, and voila, access to the show notes. Now, without further ado, let's jump back into the show. One of the best ways to understand the value of embracing resistance is by looking at real-life examples. Those stories of people who faced intense pushback only to come out stronger. Those stories remind us that resistance often brings growth, even when it feels impossible in the moment. Let's start with Oprah Winfrey. We all know her as a media mogul and one of the most influential people in the world. But did you know that early in her career, she was fired from her first television job as an anchor? Her boss told her that she was unfit for television. Imagine hearing that at the start of your career. For many of us, that would have been a moment to retreat, to give up, or to choose a safer path. But Oprah embraced the resistance. She used it as a fuel to push forward, which eventually led her to her own show, her own network, and a global platform to inspire millions. Oprah turned that moment of rejection into a pivotal part of her story. Her example shows us that when we're faced with resistance, it's often an opportunity to build resilience, and in her case, to find a unique path to success. Another classic example is Steve Jobs. He was famously fired from Apple, and it's the very company he co-founded. Imagine being kicked out of something you helped create. Jobs could have walked away or let resentment fester, but instead, he chose to dive deeper into his passion. He started other ventures, including Pixar, which eventually became one of the most successful animation studios in the world. When he returned to Apple years later, he brought with him the experiences and insights he gained during his time away. His story shows us that resistance can sometimes be life's way of redirecting us, preparing us to return stronger and with a fresh perspective. These examples are powerful reminders that resistance isn't always a barrier. It's often a catalyst for transformation. When we choose to embrace it rather than avoid it, we open ourselves up to opportunities we may never have considered. All right, we've talked about why resistance happens, shared some personal and public examples, and explored why embracing it is crucial for growth. But how do we actually do it? Let's break it down into some practical strategies that you can start applying today. Number 1, mindfulness and self-awareness. Mindfulness is one of the most effective tools for dealing with resistance. By becoming aware of our thoughts and feelings in the present moment, we can start to identify where the resistance is coming from. When you feel that inner pushback, take a few deep breaths. Sit with the discomfort instead of immediately reacting to it. Ask yourself, what am I resisting and why? Recognizing your resistance is the first step to embracing it. Number 2, reframe your thoughts. Often, resistance stems from negative and limiting beliefs. Thoughts like, I'm not good enough, or this is too risky, fuel our avoidance. Practice reframing those thoughts. Instead of thinking, this is too hard, try instead, this is a challenge and I'm capable of handling it. Reframing creates a mindset shift, making it easier to see resistance as an opportunity rather than a threat. Number 3, take small steps toward discomfort. One of the best ways to build a habit of embracing resistance is to take small steps into uncomfortable situations. Start with something manageable, a conversation you've been avoiding, or a new hobby you wanted to try. Each time you face a small challenge, you're training yourself to be more resilient. Over time, this makes it easier to tackle larger resistance without feeling overwhelmed. Number 4, celebrate small wins. Embracing resistance can be draining, so it's essential to recognize and celebrate your progress, even the small victories. Maybe you went to a social event you would have skipped, or started that side project you've been putting off. Celebrating small wins reinforces the idea that you're capable of handling discomfort. It builds confidence, making it easier to embrace future challenges. Number 5, remember the bigger picture. When we're in the thick of resistance, it's easy to lose sight of why we're pushing through. Take a moment to remind yourself of the bigger picture, the goals you're working towards, the person you want to become. Keeping your long-term vision in mind can be incredibly motivating. It reminds you that this moment of discomfort is a stepping stone on the path to growth. Another area where resistance often comes up is in our relationships and work environments. Sometimes the thing we resist in these spaces hold valuable lessons and growth opportunities. For relationships, resistance can look like avoiding difficult conversations, ignoring problems, or resisting vulnerability. Maybe you avoid addressing a reoccurring issue because it feels too uncomfortable to bring up. Or maybe you hold back from fully expressing yourself out of fear. Embracing resistance in relationships might mean having that tough conversation, being open about your feelings, or setting a boundary. These moments of resistance can strengthen your relationships and help you connect on a deeper level. Now, at work, resistance can show up as a reluctance to take on new responsibilities, avoiding leadership roles, or resisting feedback. You might think, I'm not ready for this, or what if I fail? Embracing these opportunities, even if they feel intimidating, can lead to significant career growth. Maybe taking on a new project allows you to develop skills you didn't know you had, or accepting feedback helps you improve in ways you hadn't considered. All right, let's bring it back to you. Here's a quick exercise to help you reflect on areas in your life where you might be resisting growth. Number 1, identify a current resistance. Think of something in your life right now that you're resisting. It could be a change, a decision, or even a conversation you've been avoiding. Number 2, explore the why. Write down why you're resisting it. Are you afraid of failure? Worried about others' opinions? Dig deep into the reasons behind your resistance. Number 3, reframe and take action. Now, try to reframe your thoughts around this resistance. Instead of seeing it as a threat, see it as an opportunity for growth. Ask yourself, what could I gain by facing this? Number 4, take small steps. Finally, make a commitment to take one small step towards this area of resistance. It could be as simple as starting a conversation or doing research on something you're unsure about. The goal is to take action, however small, to show yourself that you can handle it. All right, my friends, that brings us to the end of today's episode on embracing resistance. I hope this conversation has inspired you to look at resistance in a new light, as a signal for growth rather than something to avoid. Now, I want to leave you with a challenge. Think about one area in your life where you feel resistance. This week, I challenge you to lean into it. Just a little. It doesn't have to be a huge leap, just a small step that shows you're willing to explore the unknown. Thank you so much for tuning in to The Dang Good Show. If this episode resonated with you, share it with someone who might benefit from hearing it. And if you haven't yet, subscribe to stay up to date with each new episode. Next up in our series, we'll be talking about balancing intuition and logic when making big decisions. It's going to be a great conversation, so don't miss out. Until next time, stay curious, embrace the unknown, and keep growing. Much love, C-Dang signing out. Thank you for joining us on The Dang Good Show. Remember to swing by our website, thedangoodshow.com, where you can easily subscribe on platforms like Apple, Google, and Spotify to keep up with our latest episodes. Loved what you heard today? A thumbs up and a positive review on your favorite listening platform would be incredibly appreciated. And if our show struck a chord with you, sharing it with just one friend can help our community grow and thrive. Thanks once more for lending your ears to me on The Dang Good Show. Until we meet again, take care and goodbye.